Inspirational Creatives, episode 271.
The traction that he's getting is outstanding because of the quality of the thought that has gone into it. The extra thought that he's putting in, it's propelled him almost instantly into the upper echelons of podcasting in the UK, in my opinion.
Welcome to Inspirational Creatives. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence. Join me every Friday as I chat with successful artists, producers, and creative entrepreneurs who share powerful stories and strategies. They can help you to create the life that you want. Listen each week as these inspirational creatives show you how to take your creativity to the next level. You'll learn how to create a sustainable business that inspires others and gives you the financial freedom and lifestyle that you want. Thanks for listening. Make sure you sign up at inspirationalcreatives.com to get free exclusive bonus material. And now, on with the show. Rob here, and welcome to another episode of Inspirational Creatives. My guest today is no stranger to this show, and certainly no stranger in the world of podcasting. As the founder and CEO of Rebel-based media and podcast websites, and with new products, podcasts and services well underway under the Captivate and Productivity brands, to name a couple, he is somebody who, in my eyes, is not only prolific, but truly inspirational too. As a coach and mentor to hundreds, if not thousands of podcasters and small business owners worldwide, and as a huge fan of comics, Lego and Star Wars, it gives me great pleasure to welcome back onto the show today from Yorkshire, Mark Asquith. Mark, welcome.
Hi, buddy. How you doing?
Good, thanks. Good to have you back on the show. And I trust you are in Yorkshire today?
Yes, I am, sir. Yes, I am back from a little bit of travel, back in the fold.
You do get about a bit. Where have you been recently?
We did Rain Podcast Business Summit in New York, and then we did Podfest in Orlando a week or so ago. And a lot of kind of differences between the two events. You know, the Rain Podcast Business Summit was very high level industry stuff, and then the Podfest stuff was very much indies and creators. It was a nice mix. Yeah, good to mix with those two sides of the industry. You know, the independent creators and then the quote unquote big podcasting. Yeah. Which is fun.
Yeah, maybe if there's time, we'll talk a little bit about that, because I recognise that there are these sort of almost two ends of the spectrum there in podcasting these days.
Oh, hugely, yeah. And I actually put a really big blog post out about that over on rebelbasedmedia.io. The gap between indies and big podcasting, and it comes to it from those perspectives, basically. You know, just saying that, look, indies and big podcasting have got very different goals is the main crux of it. So yeah, go check that out. It's an certainly an interesting topic given the climate for podcasting right now.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, well, I'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes. But like I say, that might be worth touching upon again, because it almost sounds like there's two different podcast industries in some sense.
Definitely getting that way, definitely.
Anyway, you're no stranger to this show, and I was fascinated listening back to our last chat back in 2016, which I can't believe was 3 years ago. We talked about some of your journey there, how you gave up the 9-to-5 in 2005 and then nearly burned out in 2012, and that was 7 years. And then here we are 7 years later, 2019. What a remarkable journey you've had so far. As an avid follower of yours, and what I love about what you do is that you're ever evolving. So I'd be fascinated to hear from your point of view, how's the journey been for you in the last 3 years since we caught up? What's changed for you, and where are things going today?
Yeah, it's been a busy few years. So we've been implementing the bigger picture plan for the business. So, you know, we entered the podcast space in 2015, early 2015, and launched formally in the end of Q2 2015 with the podcast websites platform. That was never the end game. It was always the first entry, you know, the first product that we brought to market. And the big picture was always to have a group company, which we do now, which is Rebel-based Media, which is essentially a group company that owns the podcast websites company, which is the managed WordPress platform. It owns Captivate.fm, which is the world's only growth-oriented podcast host. It owns Productivity Limited, which is an interaction platform for podcasters that we're working on. And Rebel-based Media itself also sells things like our content network. It sells our recording studio. We've got a podcast recording studio here in Sheffield, and it sells our Podcast Success Academy membership as well. So we've kind of implemented the big picture. It was interesting because we had to enter the space quickly back in 2014, 2015, when we had the notion of basically a managed WordPress platform for podcasters. You know, we wanted to implement that quickly, but the big picture plan we didn't want to implement too soon, because honestly we'd not done our time in podcasting. We didn't have enough knowledge to have opinions, and it was kind of not fair. You know, it kind of annoys me and frustrates the hell out of me when you see people entering this podcasting market and really being flippant with it, not doing their time, not walking the beat. And we didn't want to be those people. So we spent 2 or 3 years really embedding ourselves in the industry. And we've built a very strong profile. We sit on a number of steering committees now, from the IAB right through to the NPR, the RAD stuff that they're doing, the analytics, so right at the top of the industry. And then work with just thousands of independents as well. So that's what we've been doing. We did our time since you and I spoke. We probably did another year and a half up until 2017 of walking the beat with podcast websites and making sure that people knew us for a product. And then since mid 2017 up until probably October 2018, we were formalizing the bigger picture plans. What did that group look like in particular, some of the hosting products, what right down to the granular features that we wanted to put out. And then probably I'd say now from October 2018, the 15 months following that, so right through to the end of this year, is basically brand repositioning. It's taking Rebel-based media to the top of the industry and having a voice in the industry and establishing each of the products within its own space. So that's the quick run through, I guess.
Yeah, right. And there is a lot to run through there. I'd love to talk to you more about the rebranding stuff, but before I do, you've definitely done your time with podcasting. There's no doubt about that. And I'm just curious to know, in your opinion, is it still a good time to start podcasting for people?
Oh yeah, but you've got to do it for the right reasons. I think it depends on what you want to podcast for.
Yeah.
It depends, what you enter in this space for. I just wrote a piece for Entrepreneur today, which is, it's about entrepreneurs getting into the podcasting space and basically doing the same old thing that everyone else is doing. And you just can't do that anymore. It's a storytelling medium. People are there to be entertained. And it's busier than it was 3-4 years ago. So you've got to be doing good stuff. That's the key thing.
What do you feel are the right reasons to be getting into podcasting?
That you're doing it for yourself and you're doing it for your audience. And what I mean by doing it for yourself is that you're doing it in such a way that you've got passion for it and that you're not in it for a quick win or a quick buck. You've got to want to tell the stories. And, if you're only in it to come into this space and try and generate a high gross podcast, it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. You've got to want to enter it for the long term and for that passion. And you've got to want to attract an audience that cares about the stories that you're telling. Because if you don't, it's not like it was 4 years ago. You can't just create an interview podcast that does the same thing that everyone else is doing. You just, you can't churn the content out. I mean, the big difference that I immediately noticed, when we and me started chatting a second ago, was that you knew the details of the old conversation that we'd had. And you'd done the time and you'd researched and you'd looked at what we were doing since then. 99.9% of podcasters in the entrepreneurial space don't do that. They will just create a format like a JLD did or whatever, and they will just churn that content. And honestly, that is not good enough anymore. It's just not good enough. Even John's not doing it anymore.
Yeah. Tell me about this is something that blew my mind. I don't know how many episodes are you on now with the 7-Minute Mentor?
606, in fact, I've got it in front of me. 606 and 607 will be the last one.
Wow. Okay. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But 606, right? And the funny thing was, when we last spoke in 2016, that series hadn't been created. And
absolutely.
Yeah. And that blew my mind because to me, in the nicest possible way, it feels like it's been around forever. It's just, it's a series that's there. It's daily. It comes out. It does exactly what it promises to deliver. It hadn't even been created 3 years ago. So tell me about that journey. All the more excited to talk about that now that you're telling me 607 is going to be the last one.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I stopped my original interview podcast for the very reasons that I've just spoken about. Ultimately, people like you are doing interview podcasts better than I can. And I'm a little bit of a monologuer. So to do an interview podcast for me didn't really fit as well as it could have done. Like, people wanted more and more from me. They were asking for my opinions. They were asking for my knowledge. So I thought, oh, wait a second, I should probably not do interviews. So I took a few months off. I did a seasonal based show, which I still do seasons to this day of, which is sort of guides to X. And then I thought I'll do this 7-minute show. So I did a pile of research, obviously having a lot of podcasters and podcast listeners on the books, did a lot of research with them and discovered that people struggle to fit new shows into their schedule. They're a little bit reticent to displace shows that they already listen to. They've got a limited time to listen to podcasts. And thus, I created this 7-minute format and, set out to do a daily show 7 days a week, teaching people small business as I was building podcast websites at the time. Now, I did that as a 7-day-a-week show, and then I moved it to 5 days, then I moved it to 3 days. Now, a lot of people will look at that and go, well, you're not very good at sticking to this. And the point is actually it's exactly the opposite, which I thought was very, very interesting. I wasn't nervous to survey my audience every single quarter and ask them their listening habits. And when they told me what their listening habits were, my job was to do the very best for them and support their listening habits. So when they come back at me and said, you know what, Marco, actually there are more podcasts in the world. I'm struggling to listen to 5 days a week, but I still really love your content and don't want to not listen. The logical choice is to give them a little bit less content, but give it to them in a really high quality manner. So that's a really big lesson. You've got to be willing to move with the times on it. So I launched this 7-Minute Mentor podcast. But alongside that, this was April 2018, and I'm 607 shows in as of next Monday, which will be the last one. And the reason that I'm stopping this is that over the last 18 months, or 2 years, in fact, my sole focus has been podcasting. And it's been helping thousands of podcasters. It's been speaking at events from Podcast Movement, Podfest. I've been asked to speak at Harvard. I spoke at Harvard last year on podcasting, Upreneur Summit. I've spoke like all of the events that you want to speak at, I've spoken at on podcasting. And even tiny little workshops at places like the Harvard Club in New York. So for some reason, people really value what I say in podcasting. I think the reason is, like, you know me, man, I'm pretty outspoken. I'm very, very straight talking. I will literally call things as I see them. And there aren't that many people doing that in podcasting. There's only maybe 2 or 3 that I can think of that have got a similar personality to me, that are willing to sit in front of a video or a microphone and just deliver something really robust and pretty honest. There aren't that many people doing that. So as I kind of went through the Rebel-Based Media setup, the group setup, and bringing podcast websites under that banner, and then Captivate and Productivity and the studio and the Success Academy and the design studio and all the brands that we've got, more and more people just kept asking me for podcast advice every day, all of the time. And as part of the marketing for Rebel-Based Media, we do a heck of a lot of thought leadership stuff. So we'll do opinion-based stuff at the industry level, and we'll do a lot of educational stuff. So it was kind of weird for me to be teaching people on the 7-Minute Mentor about how I'm building Rebel-Based Media, the business, when so many people want my podcast content. So I did a little bit of a pilot. I think it was I want to say February this year. Let's have a look. Yeah, it was February this year. I did my first ever month of pure podcast only content on the 7-Minute Mentor. And then I did it again in March, where we talked about podcast rebranding. And it's had the best response of any content that I've ever put out there, because it's so closely entrenched with the Rebel-Based Media work. So it's kind of like, well, wait a sec. He's building this tech company over here and this consulting company that does podcast stuff. But yet, like, he's actually trying this stuff on his own podcast and talking and giving the lessons on his own podcast. And it really just works nicely. So like I said, from episode 607, I'm going to be stopping it insofar as having a month off. I'm going to be taking April off and having the 7-Minute Mentor archived. I'm literally going to go through it and turn it into probably 3 200 episode archives in the iTunes store in Apple Podcasts. When the feed is reactivated in May, the new show will be called the Podcast Accelerator, which ties up with my coaching program that I do. It's a very limited thing that I do, but that's called the Podcast Accelerator as well. So we'll have the Podcast Accelerator podcast. It'll be 3 times a week, 7 minutes a shot, and still delivering the same kind of value, but just really clearly podcast focused. And there's a lot of lessons that people can take from that. I guarantee that, I've been warming up my audience to this idea that we're going to be rebranding the podcast. And I can guarantee on Monday when I tell people that, no one will bat an eyelid. They'll all come back on the 1st of May when I relaunch it, because I'm doing it for the right reason. I'm not just fading and flaking on it. I'm actually saying to people, look, give me a month. I need to revamp some stuff. I'm going to come back. Here's when I'm going to come back. Here's what I'm coming back with. You don't have to do anything. I'll let you know. So there's a big sort of nervous lesson that can be learned from that, which is a lot of people get on this content hamster wheel with the podcast and then can't ever get off it because they're scared to death of people saying, whoa, why are you doing that? So that's a huge lesson that I think podcasters have got to learn.
Yeah, definitely. And I can relate with that too. What I love about what you just said there, though, Mark, is it sounds to me like it's very much about just keeping the listener in the loop. it's about communication, letting them know what you're up to in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where, the audience, this is what I wrote in this piece for Entrepreneur earlier, is this idea that, if you're building a podcast out, your audience tunes in for the content to start with, because the content has to be interesting. It's got to be interesting. So they'll tune in for the content first. Like my words, they've got to do. But after a few episodes, they tune in for your take on the content. And then they tune in for your little quirks and idiosyncrasies. They tune in for your bits of personality. The things that no one else is doing. The fact that I'm kind of a grumpy English podcasting guy and I'll drop an F-bomb in and, I get annoyed when people talk rubbish about things and give bad advice. And I'm willing to be the one to stand up and say, whoa, what about if we just think a little bit differently about things? And people tune in for that. And I think that's one thing that you've got to realize is that communicating with your audience, your audience is key because they tune in for you. Like I said, they may start tuning in for the content, but they continue listening because they want to hear how you do it. And you cannot devalue yourself. I did it on episode 599 of the 7-Minute Mentor. It came out the 13th of March, and it was the title of it was "If you're rebranding your podcast, don't devalue you." And the kind of tagline for that was, so many podcasters forget that the reason that listeners love their show is because of them, the host. When you're rebranding your podcast, it's easy to go really over the top with formats and think, right, we're going to do an interview show, we're going to do these segments, it's going to be amazing, we're going to kind of create this really complex format. But they forget that the only thing that the people listening to the show want is you to deliver the things that you deliver in the way that you deliver them. And it really is that clear. Yeah.
So in that respect, it's about personality.
I think it's about personality, and I think it's about being personable, and I think that's what the difference is. I think there's a difference between having a sprayed on personality. Some of the kind of business podcasters they spray on this personality, and then when you meet them in real life, they've got like 30 seconds of that personality in them, then they revert and snap back to their actual personality. And I think that is the difference between so many podcasters these days that are standing out with story-based podcasts, is that, you know what? Yes, my personality is like this, but what you'll see is that my personality is like this. Like, you've met me, we've had beer, we drunk. I am exactly the same as I am on my podcast. If people meet me at conferences, I will talk to you the very same as I talk to my friend. There's no difference with that. And that's where you become personable. So having a personality is one thing, and selling your podcast and your show and your content based on your personality is one thing. But upholding the basis of your personality through being personable is what I think separates the people who truly stand the test of time with content versus those that flake in and out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating. One of the things I'm curious about, and I'd love to hear your view on this, is I wonder if it's a confidence thing. I realise that some people kind of spray on that personality just to get quick results in some shape or form, and they may do that with podcasting too. But do you think there's a confidence thing going on here too for some?
Yeah, there's got to be, and I think podcasting overall, I think it builds your confidence. I think it builds your ability to be able to talk and articulate things. And, I talk really quick, like super bloody quick. And even I sometimes think, what did I just say? Like, what? Quite literally, what was that word supposed to be? And I think that comes from, like my mind racing ahead of me a lot. My brain works really, really quickly. And I didn't have the confidence, like you and I are talking now, and I'm talking quite quick. But on my show, or if I'm delivering a public talk, it's taken me years to develop the confidence to slow it down.
Right.
And that's a thing with public speakers. When you see you can always tell a speaker that's new because they zip through the talk. I'm usually, on my talks, I did it at Youpreneur Summit. Don't tell Chris. Chris, if you're listening, this is not true. What I'm about to say is not true. I'd not practiced my talk at all for Youpreneur Summit. I just, in my head, I knew the stories that I wanted to tell, and I'd set the slides up. I'm very minimalist, and I know the story beats. I'm just, naturally, I can deliver things. And I work better without scripts. I work better at, just knowing the story beats and delivering those beats. I'd not rehearsed that. I didn't know how long it was going to take. Honestly, I swear I had no idea how long it was going to take. And Chris was like, mate, you've got 25, 30 minutes. I was like, yeah, that'll be fine, probably. And sure enough, when I looked at the clock was ticking down, and I literally said, my last word, I said the words "thank you" with 3 seconds left.
Wow.
And it was having the confidence to know, okay, I'm 12 minutes in. I can start to be a little bit more loquacious. I can have a few more stories in there. I can drop a little bit more value or give a bit more education because I can kind of gauge this. And podcasters do the same thing. They lean on their personality, which is that sprayed on version to start with. So they'll take like a particular part of their personality. Let's say that someone says you are funny. You know, you're a funny guy. When you become this sprayed-on personality, you turn into Chandler Bing. You turn into this overly trying to be funny every sentence person. Like you over the top amplify the 1, 2, 3 threads of your personality that people have identified as being quality. And you that's when you become a little bit too larger than life. And I think the more confidence you get, the more you realize that you don't have to be those things all of the time. It's more about just being measured. It's more about just having a bit of thoughtfulness and a little bit more time to articulate your thoughts and not rush through things, and understanding that you don't always have to have an answer or you don't always have to fill that space. And as a podcaster, you know, like I talked about with the public speaking, you hear people talk too fast when they're doing public talks, and that's a sign of them not been very seasoned in it. As a podcaster, listen to the silences. You know, listen to those half a second pauses or those 1 second pauses that an uncomfortable, inexperienced person with a little bit less confidence than you or I might have, the silences that those guys would be tempted to fill. You know, you or I will let those breathe, and that's a huge difference. That is one thing that will take your podcast from being average to being very good, is measured white space, you know, measured silence.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you remind me when you describe that of like the radio broadcasters, you know, like the classics, the really good ones. They can really hold the space really, really well.
Yeah, exactly. And if you study those guys, study how they interview, study how they articulate things. And I'll tell you the best person for this, in my opinion, is Barack Obama. He's absolutely wonderful. I remember being blown away. He was doing I think it was 2008, prior to him being elected, he was doing the TV debates with Senator John McCain. And McCain was really like interjecting. He was jumping in, talking over, and he was, you know, everything that Barack Obama said that McCain disagreed with, he was instantly trying to shoot down. And Barack Obama didn't do that. Every time John McCain spoke and there was a problem that Barack had seen, he simply wrote it down. He took his time. He thought about it. He wrote every bone of contention that he had down. And after McCain had finished, Obama very methodically, very in an articulate manner, very eloquently took apart every bone of contention that he had with McCain's spiel. And I thought that was really, really interesting to watch, how you can have measured silence. And I think when you listen to some of the podcasts that I put out in particular around education, so the last 2 months of the 7 Minute Mentor, 582 to 606, where it's been very specific podcast education, you'll notice that I leave a lot of very measured spaces, or as a, you know, harking back to my teaching days and my training days, I'll reiterate things, and I'll very carefully, you know, I'll leave a bit of space, and I might say something like, look, what you've got to remember is that you have to market your show. You have to market that show. And I'll leave that kind of space, and I'll deliver that second kind of punch where people, you know, just people are then listening to it. And I do think that's what separates the interviewers, the radio hosts, the TV personalities. Those people are like the top 2, 3, 4, 5% in their industry, from those of us that are kind of just pottering about and doing a decent job of it. And so you've got to learn story. You've got to learn the punchy parts of it. You've got to learn what is going to matter to people, not what is going to matter to you. You know, what is going to resonate with these people, and how can I deliver that in such a way that it's got the most effect, and whether that's with measured silence or whether that's with repetition and very careful repetition. It's very, very interesting. And I do think if podcasters, particularly those who are getting started, study that, I think they come out of the blocks a lot faster and they'll do a lot better. Another great example of this is a friend of mine, Steve Lazarus. So Steve came onto my coaching program, and we've been working together for a couple of years. And he wanted to develop a show around his insurance company, and we decided that ultimately wasn't going to work. It was a little bit boring. And I just said to him, look, man, you obviously want a podcast. What do you want to do? And he said, you know, I live in London. I just bloody love London. And I said, all right, well, let's do something around that. And thus, this podcast, Your London Legacy, was created. It's telling the timeless stories of London's hidden personalities. That's the tagline. And he goes out and interviews people, but then what he does, which is magical, which is propelled him, in my opinion, into being one of the top podcasts in the UK in a very short space of time, is he spends time crafting a narrative for the beginning of his show, and he delivers them with such quality and such precision that you are instantly hooked after 5 seconds. And it's unbelievable. And the traction that he's getting is outstanding because of the quality of the thought that has got into it. Now, it would have been easy for someone like Steve to not worry about saying, right, I've done an interview. Now I'm going to craft this story and I'm going to spin a narrative at the beginning and then bring the interviewee on. It would have been easy for him not to do that. He would have still done the interviews. He would have still put the episodes out. He would have still got a little bit of traffic. But the extra thought that he's putting in, it's propelled him almost instantly into the upper echelons of podcasting in the UK, in my opinion. And I feel like, back to that question earlier, should people still be entering podcasting? Yes, they should, but they should be doing so with a little bit extra, just like Steve's done.
I love that. It's almost taking podcasts to that next level, isn't it? It's just taking it a little bit more seriously, giving it that little bit more thought to really separate it from the rest of the pack.
Yeah, and it's definitely thinking, what's going to hook people into the content. Now, there's actually a really boring technical reasoning for this as well. If you look at the IAB guidelines, Interactive Advertising Bureau, the people that specify whether or not a podcast download is a valid download or not, we here at Rebel Base Media with our Captivate hosting platform, we have to adhere to those guidelines, just like Libsyn do and just like Blueberry do and Podbean and anyone else out there on the market that's doing podcast hosting. There's IAB compliance. We're IAB compliant, and then there's a next level which has just been introduced early this year, which is IAB certification, which all of the hosts at some point over the next year or so will have to go through, us included, which we're kicking off right now. And when you look at those guidelines, it says that one of the specifiers, one of the algorithmic measurements and factors in whether or not a download counts is whether there's enough data received from the media host to warrant or to qualify and to be measured as approximately 1 minute of audio. So if you're streaming that, downloads are a little bit different. So if you get it downloaded to your device, if a full file has been downloaded, it's going to probably count as a download. But if you're streaming it, which Spotify do, and which if you're browsing for a new podcast to listen to, if you're browsing and you think, oh, all right, Kevin Smith, Fat Man on Batman, that looks decent. He's got Mark Bernardine on there, Mark Hamill. This looks pretty solid. I'm going to give it a go. You press play. You don't press download. You press play because you want to listen to it then. So then it starts streaming to your device. If the first minute of content is not very good, and that extra detail that Steve does, okay, here's a narrative. It's 7 o'clock. It's cold. It's early. I'm wet through. I'm soaking, knee deep in the Thames. If he didn't do that, and it was just, hi guys, here I am with a mudlarker, Jason, what are we doing? Here's an interview. Is that as tempting? Is that going to get new listeners streaming over the 1 minute mark? Mm-hmm. It's not as likely to. Thus, you are going to probably lose some downloads. And as a podcaster looking to grow your show, that's the exact opposite of what you want to do. So there is a technical reason for going that extra mile as well. So the pre-rolls that people put in, I'm after this 607, I'm getting rid of all of the music on my show that is superfluous. It will be literally my old rock music. You remember from Excellence Expected days? Yeah. It will be that rock music. It will be boom, 5 seconds of that, and then there's me talking and fading the music out. And it's for that reason. I can give people more content. They're not tuning in to watch a TV show. And even if you look at TV shows, I remember watching, me, I'm a massive DC Comics fan.
Yes.
In the 9 years since Smallville has finished, okay, I used to love Smallville, but it had a 30-second or a 1 minute 30-second intro. That was an amazing song, but dull. Think about EastEnders, massive theme song. But then think about Netflix. Then think about Lost. Then think about like Arrow and think about, I don't know, 24. It's content. There's a flash of a logo, and then the credits roll over the content as well. So you straight back to the content.
Yeah.
We as podcasters, we can get a little bit OTT in our own minds. We think, well, look, we're independent podcasters. We've created this cool thing. I'm going to spend $100 on creating an amazing theme song for the beginning of it. And it's brilliant. It strokes our ego a little bit because look at me, I've got my own theme song. Like, you're not The Rock. You don't need a theme song. So it's more about getting the quality of the content out there and getting people to that content a little bit earlier. And I know that's a massive monologue, but I think it's important stuff for people to learn.
I'm really glad you've shared that, Mark, because this is not only, I suppose, I don't think cutting edge is quite the right word, but certainly leading edge. This is where podcasting is at today. And I'm glad you've shared it because it's quite revealing in terms of all of a sudden my mind's just kind of like spinning around in terms of all the different podcasts I listen to and the variety and in terms of what you're talking about there, the good and the bad, if you want to judge it that way. I'm really delighted that you've shared that because I think this stuff is really, really important, certainly for people looking to get into podcasting, but people like myself that have been in podcasting for ages. And you know what, we can get a bit stuck in our own ways and we can learn from what might be a good idea to change or what might be a good move next. So with that in mind and sort of trying to bring it all together in some shape or form, I know you've covered this recently with some of your live, you do live coaching on Facebook each week. And I know you've covered this recently, but I'd love to ask you this question because I think it's prevalent given what you've kindly just shared with us. When it comes to rebranding, how do you know when it's best to rebrand or actually just start something new?
Well, I think it depends on your goals. And I think the thing to consider with this is that podcasting is different to most other things. It's one of those things where you've got the problem of keeping your listeners subscribed. The physical, actual RSS feed subscription. Mm-hmm. Theoretically, the 7-Minute Mentor is stopping. But ultimately, the Podcast Accelerator podcast that replaces it, same format, same release schedule, but just focused on podcasting, is kind of a different podcast. In fact, it's a wholly different podcast, albeit sharing 99% of the characteristics. Mm-hmm. So I could say I'm stopping the 7-Minute Mentor. But from a perception perspective, it's easier and better for the listener to say, look, guys, I've listened to what you said because this genuinely is a reaction to audience. I've listened to what you said, so I'm rebranding the show. Now, the reason that I chose to say rebranding is because they know then that everything will remain on the same feed. They don't have to do anything. Whereas if you say, I'm stopping and I'm starting, they're like, right, where do we find the new stuff? And it introduces a behavioral and educational challenge, which you don't want to have to deal with. So that's, I think, rebranding overall as a business is slightly different to rebranding as a podcaster. Generally speaking, a rebrand for your podcast, I think, is a great thing to do just to freshen it up. It's rare that you'll need to change the name. All right. I'm only changing the name because I'm literally focused wholly on podcasting. And I need it to be clear that it is this. Okay. That this is podcast oriented. But my first episode, the trailer, will be from the ashes of the 7-Minute Mentor because here's XYZ things that happened comes the Podcast Accelerator. That will be the trailer. Mm-hmm. It will be, look, if you know me for this, don't worry, because I'm a network on Apple Podcasts as well. I'm a publisher on there with various shows. And in Captivate and my hosting platform, I'll have a network in there as well. I will still be able to say, don't worry, guys, click more from this publisher if you want the 7-Minute Mentor archives. That's all good. And that's why I think a rebrand is important in podcasting terms. Usually, I do think 99% of the time you can keep the name. If School of Podcasting, Dave Jackson, if he rebranded to something else, it wouldn't be a name change. It would be a visual update and probably some audio updates. Some of the drops that he uses would change. But it would still be called the School of Podcasting because it's got all of the heritage behind it. For me, personally, my heritage is markasquith.com. It's me, the brand. Okay, it's what I do. That could be Rebel Based Media. It could be my Podcast Accelerator podcast. It could be the other products and services that I've had in the past. It's where you choose to build your brand. Dave Jackson chooses to build the School of Podcasting as his core brand. I choose to build Rebel Based Media and markasquith.com, who is the founder of Rebel Based Media. Mm-hmm. So, so it depends where you put your eggs.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying with that one.
Yeah.
That's why you've got to appraise every option on your merits. Sometimes it will be better to stop and start something. But as a podcaster, you need continuity in subscription. That is a massive, massive deal. So often, terming this as a rebrand or a pivot or whatever else you want to call it is the better way to do it.
Yeah, got it. Just on that then, just to tie a bow on it, tell me about the closure, so to speak, of Excellence Expected. What's happening to all the content that was on that, and how does that kind of morph into Mark Asquith and also Rebel Base Media?
Yeah, good question, bro. So it's all staying. It's all staying. I'll basically, I'm going to be taking all my old blog content, finding everything that's podcast oriented, updating that, republishing it with more recent dates on it, redoing the artwork for it, and bringing that to the top of the Excellence Expected blog. All of my podcasts, Excellence Expected volumes 1 through 4, season 1 of my educational guides, season 2 of the educational guides, the 7-Minute Mentor, all 607 episodes. They'll all receive markasquith.com brand upgrades for the cover art and so on. The website will be revamped. All of the Excellence Expected URLs will repoint to markasquith.com. So it's taking Excellence Expected and just turning it into markasquith.com. Nothing will be removed. Nothing will disappear. And the big reason for that is that I want to be able to talk as the CEO of Rebel Base Media. I want to be able to say, this is me, and I'm using myself as this podcast testing ground. But the real cool thing is, and this is why I've chosen to build my brand on markasquith.com and not on podcastaccelerator.com or something else, is that in the future, I don't know what I'll be doing. 10 years time, what will I have done? Will I still be in podcasting? I don't know. I want the flexibility to be able to do, like, people still ask me for consulting work and training work and marketing work and strategic work. People ask me that all of the time. So I do want to be able to say, look, if you want to hire me for a speaking gig, go to markasquith.com. Again, it's eggs in baskets. It's a little bit like Gary Vee. It's Gary Vee's, his social profiles, and then his businesses have got their own little profiles as well. But the main, his main opinions about life and theories and so on go through the Gary Vee brand, which is kind of what mine will do. I'll be saying, look, here's my experiences with this stuff, and here's industry education, here's industry opinions from Rebel Base Media, because that brand is able to talk about that stuff.
Amazing stuff there, Mark. We've covered a lot of ground in a very short amount of time, and I deeply appreciate your time today, Mark. As always, it's always great to chat with you and just learn what's going on in your world. I'd love to ask you, just before we wrap up, what's next for you, Mark? What are you working on right now, and what's the rest of 2019 and maybe 2020 hold for you?
So we've got the Rebel Base Media plan continuing. So like I said, in October, we started a big company repositioning inside the podcasting industry. That'll be completed by the end of this year. So the podcast websites, platform, and service offerings will be revamped. We've got the Captivate.fm hosting platform launching in April. It was supposed to be February, but development, what that's like. Like how things just go on. There's always something else to do, mate. So that's Captivate, which is really good. We're really, really happy with that. And then we're even more excited for version 2 and version 3 of Captivate, because we're going to be doing some pretty unique stuff for podcasters. There'll be something moving in the productivity space as well. Productivity is our interaction platform, which we launched under a veil of secrecy at Podcast Movement 2018. And we keep under the radar a little bit, because that's a slightly different type of offer that we're bringing. So that'll be coming out in 2019 as well, some work around that. And then we're looking to just build Rebel Base Media up and help podcasters regionally. We've got the studio, the podcast recording studio in Sheffield, which anyone can book. Just go to rebelbasemedia.io. You can literally just go in and book that. So we just want to help as many creators as possible right through to 2019 and beyond.
Brilliant. And where's the best place for our listener to connect with you, Mark?
Probably on YouTube. I don't know what happened to my voice then. Probably on YouTube. I think I'm getting a cold. So yeah, just go to YouTube, search for Rebel Base Media, and we've got some pretty sweet podcasting tutorials on there, some big opinion pieces. So yeah, check it out, YouTube, and just search for Rebel Base Media.
Amazing. Mark, thanks so much for your time. A great conversation yet again.
Thank you, mate. You're a great host. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Nothing beats the stories and advice of an expert to help you raise your creative game. I would love to know what you thought about today's episode, so don't forget to subscribe in iTunes, where you can rate and review the show. If you like this episode, I invite you to share it on Facebook or Twitter with the one person you know who will benefit from the wisdom shared here today. You can find the show notes on inspirationalcreatives.com/podcast. If you have a burning question or a great idea for a guest, head on over to inspirationalcreatives.com/contact, where you can connect with me there.